I am so glad that we decided to continue this conversation. Um, you had met with me I guess, while I was in the hospital with Max after he had his spinal cord detethered, and you got to see how hard it is for someone to have a meeting while being in the hospital. I feel like I was bouncing around all these rooms, but I think our conversation needed to continue. I want you to tell me a little bit more about you and why you've been led to have a study about the need for adult size changing tables.
Yeah, so I'm Geffen Chimon. I'm a master in public health student at Berkeley and also a med student at Emory. And I've just gotten really interested in disability advocacy and inclusion and accessibility kind of throughout med school and just um and it's not really something that we've gotten to really talk about or think about while getting our medical training, which is something that I think needs to change. So I was at a virtual disability conference and someone was talking about home health and just kind of mentioned it like as a side comment that a lot of people who need help with their toileting needs just don't have like a safe, dignified place to do that in most public restrooms. And that was kind of a moment where it's something I hadn't thought about because, when the world is built for you, you don't really think too much about it. But once I started thinking about it and reading about it, it's just like, of course, that is something that is so important. So that is why for my thesis project, I decided to interview caregivers and self-advocates about this need.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that still just don't even have a clue. I run into people every day that has not a clue that so many people like myself and our family feel isolated from the world at times, and have anxiety about going new places that we've never been just because we don't really know what to expect. Am I going to have to make a phone call and make sure that they've got accommodations? Or are we just going to go and just hope we don't need accommodations? If we do go, are we willing to leave early? Are we going to go to the car? Or are we going to come home? What is the plan? And most families don't. I never had to think about that before. I had Max, my other two kids, potty trained at a typical age, 2 years old and 2.5. And with him, I realized it just sitting in a waiting room one day, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, like, where am I going to change him? And I'd read a little bit online about other families just mentioning using their car. And we bought a van knowing that we would need a lot of access for equipment, but the conversation it demands that we talk about ableism. And ableism, just the thought of it, unknown bias, that whenever we really just do as we've always done in society. And I think it's really hard for people to imagine, even back in 2019, whenever I brought this issue up to the people I felt could make real change and acknowledge the issue. It's so hard for people to even acknowledge the issue, because how in the world can we be in 2023 and some people still don't have restroom access in this country, that we have segregated restroom access in America? So I want to thank you so much for diving in. We need scholarly articles about this. Can you tell me a little bit about your work that you're doing in the paper that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I guess the goal of this paper or the study is really to kind of elevate the stories of other people who haven't really had the platform to, or there's a lot of great op-eds. I think I read one that you wrote also, and people are really sharing their stories and doing this incredible work. So my goal is kind of to bring that into like the academic world and hopefully get like a publication or something. Um, just so that's like another thing that you can cite in your advocacy and in your efforts to bring about these bills and get these grants and pass this funding to increase adult changing tables. So I've just been like meeting with caregivers and self advocates and asking them really open-ended questions kind of about how they go out into public and where they like to go and what those experiences are like, and trying to use the restroom. And just a lot of people are saying like that their day is so limited. They have to go home early from places because of like inaccessible restrooms, or they just don't go out. They stay home. They feel just this isolation. So I'm just identifying kind of themes and similarities, and just the patterns. A lot of people, like you mentioned, have changed their loved one on the restroom floor, in cars, and in baby changing stations, like, or tables, like when their child is way too big, and just all these like risks of injuries and falls and uncomfortable positions. And it's just talking about how it's so inhumane and undignified, and that it's a basic human need has been a really big theme. And then also just asking them kind of what they want to see and what accessibility means to them in terms of the restroom, and where they would like to see these changes. So people have really incredible insights because this is their life that they live. So yeah, I've just been kind of trying to gather those stories and put together the themes of it, and hopefully bring that into an academic setting and publish it to spread awareness.
Yeah. You asked me a question that kind of got me emotional. And
In our previous meeting,
yeah, you had asked me if I had ever changed Max on the floor.
yeah,
And I told you my story about we had taken a road trip out to California, and we had stopped along all the tourist destinations, the Grand Canyon, the crater, Sequoia National Park, all these places. And we were driving through, I think either New Mexico, I think it was New Mexico, or I can't remember. I think it might have been Arizona. Anyway, it was very hot. It was really hot. And I decided that I didn't want to change Max in the car. And at the time, he wasn't even 50 pounds, but I had to put him on the floor in a restroom because they didn't have a baby changing station inside. And that was the only time I've ever changed Max on the restroom floor. And I wasn't expecting my emotional reaction whenever I was telling you that story, but I haven't visited that story in years. And it is degrading how society views people who put their child on the floor in a restroom. It's I feel discrimination.
mentioned, I think what your other child heard someone say, was that right?
So we had stopped at a visitor center, and Wesley at the time was probably 5. And at that age, not very many mothers would send their 5-year-old child into a restroom alone. So he and Max and I would all went into the accessible stall, and I had Maxwell on the floor on a pad, changing him. And there was other women in the restroom. And as they were leaving to walk out, my husband had taken our oldest son into the restroom with him, and they had gone to the restroom, and they were out waiting on us. And they overheard these 2 women say how disgusting I was. And my son got to hear that. My husband had to hear that. And then we had a conversation in the car about, because this was when we knew we would be facing this issue. I said, well, yeah, we're going to be out in public a lot. And how many times is Mac's going to be exposed to being naked in a car in a parking lot, or if we do choose to stay inside a facility, are we using a couch? Are we having to ask permission to go see an executive member of the building and ask for an office? Are you going to direct me to the floor in your office, a nursing mother's room, or the restroom? Or am I going to find some quiet couch tucked in a corner somewhere around here? Do I have to walk around looking for an appropriate place? It's in 2023, for anyone to be against updating our building standards, knowing that so many families like mine literally have nowhere to go. And then, so I made a note to talk about feelings. So Max has feelings as a 6.5 child living with severe developmental disabilities. He has feelings about the way people treat him in society. And when he knows he doesn't have restroom access most places we go, and to overhear someone direct him and me or whoever is with him to the floor in a restroom, he knows that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
So his feelings are not considered. My feelings as a mother and caregiver, as a tax-paying citizen, and then the feelings of the state employee or the federal employee or just any employee in a building having the only option to direct a 6.5-year-old child and his mother to the floor, or watch as we walk away and leave a building and knowing we are returning to a parking lot for toileting needs.
Yeah.
Or knowing that there's millions of disabled Americans and their families that choose not to leave their home because basic human needs are not met.
Yeah. A lot of people have mentioned that, we have hooks on the back of stall doors because we don't want to put our bags and our purses on the floor. And there's, in a lot of airports, most that I've seen, there's now like service animal relief areas, which is also really important for inclusion, but just that money and time and planning is going into making sure that service animals have a space to go to the restroom is really interesting.
Yeah. Diving in and just going through every building I go to and I advocate for change, I always look at their accessibility page. And every time I've ever gone in, other than just, there's been a couple of buildings, the Science Museum Oklahoma and the Oklahoma History Center has had great response to their accessibility pages. But when you're inviting an individual into your building, you're inviting hearing impaired individuals. So in visually impaired, those on with spectrum disorders and nursing mothers and caregivers and all of these people that you're inviting to a building, they all have needs, basic human needs. And the thought that our government has spent so much time planning for those with disabilities and their need for a service animal relief area for their service animal. That's important too. But the fact that basic human needs in these buildings has not been addressed first and foremost. So I've recently reached out to my member of Congress, Frank Lucas. We did some redistricting in Oklahoma, and I'm hopeful. I have a lot of hope that since I filed an ADA grievance on Yellowstone National Park, and I've got the U.S. Department of Interior talking to me about removing barriers like this at Yellowstone and Mount Rushmore. If I can file an ADA grievance on the Oklahoma Department of Transportation and force a state agency to put in one of these tables to put an end to my family having the option of the floor in a restroom or our vehicle in the parking lot, if I can force a state agency to do that in 7 buildings, If I can spend 3 years of my life, and after the third most powerful man in Oklahoma fighting at Universal Table, if I can get an attorney and through advocacy efforts and prove to him that my son has restroom access in a Title II building in the Oklahoma State Capitol, why are we not looking at legislation? Why has Congress been so silent? I recently submitted an agreement with Congressman Frank Lucas for him to have personal access to my complaint with the United States Justice Department on the Oklahoma State Capitol. And I think if I just sat with him and showed him my complaint with Yellowstone, with my complaint with Mount Rushmore, with my complaint with my grievance with ODOT, my complaint with the state capitol, and how after 3 years of attorneys going back and forth on whether or not an American has restroom access in this country, for any lawmaker or member of Congress to not take that seriously, we're looking at a whole nother set of issues, ableism, arrogance, apathy.
Yeah, in my interview, I think I asked you, and I ask a lot of people why they think that these accommodations are so rare. And a lot of people said, it's like a lack of awareness and education, but it sounds like even with that, there's so much other red tape you have to go through, and it's not like once you tell your representatives about the issue, it's not like it's fixed right all of a sudden. Seems like a lot of ableism, like you said.
And the culture of the Capitol, the culture of the Oklahoma legislature is extremely toxic. It's embarrassing at sometimes. You've got pride and prejudice and then political games, and all of that put before the betterment of our people. I know so many people that were not born with intellectual or developmental delays or disabilities, and they were in a car wreck and had a bad spinal cord injury, or they were in an ATV accident and rolled over and broke their back. The neurological damage, the nerve damage that affects the muscle weakness in your legs, the control of your legs, the control of your bowels and bladder. For anyone to say, well, because you have a spinal cord injury now, you are not worthy to have a dignified, private, and safe and accessible restroom. It speaks loudly of people's, the way they view people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
you can age into it, into having a disability. I think someone said it's the only group that you can join anytime, anywhere. And, by having these accommodations in place, we're really also protecting our future self and our ability to still participate in the community once and if we need help using the restroom and we need to be changed.
Well, and we think about how many people are living in adult nursing homes and assisted living centers. And my grandmother had Parkinson's disease. This house I live in, she built with her husband for her kids. And my mother and her brothers were raised here. And she spent the last year of her life confined to her own body. The medicine she had to take, she was not able to move and she never left that nursing home. But had there been supports in place, had we had a wheelchair and an accessible vehicle that could have helped her transportation even at the time, I'm so proud of the Civic Center Music Hall here in Oklahoma City. There are some incredible productions put on there, and that are ageless, all ages can go there and enjoy their time there. And they're one of the few places in Oklahoma City that literally could provide access for anyone. The anyone living in an assisted living center or experiences a lot of time being at home. If I were to spend the last year of my life in a living assisted living center or a nursing home, I would love for my kids to be able to take me out in society and have basic human needs. That I would have water, maybe some food, and a place to go to the restroom. I'm really discouraged. I thought that with all this work, getting these tables, they're popping up everywhere, and there's 5 state-owned buildings now that will have an adult size changing table. And for the bill to be dead once again this far in the game, it's shameful.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about Max's law and just kind of what it said in your journey there, just if someone's tuning in and they might not be familiar?
Yeah. So it was in 2019, I realized that Max wouldn't have restroom access. We were at the Oklahoma Children's Hospital, and the baby changing station had fallen off the wall. And I had a receptionist just direct me to a couch out in the waiting room. And Max has neurogenic bowel and a trabeculated bladder that he takes medicine for to paralyze his bladder muscles so it can grow and be a healthy size. But in doing that, I have to cath him every 3 to 4 hours for his kidney and bladder health, but also to keep him continent and dry. So anytime after 3 hours, he could be, if he's drinking like he should be drinking, he could be sitting in a soiled diaper. And this is a problem he'll have his whole life, or not a problem. It's just the way his body functions. Every 3 hours, Max will need to go to the restroom when he's older and cath himself so he can stay dry. For now, Max is, he just went through detethering surgery, and he spent 2 weeks laying down, and just today got back in his walker and started scooting around again after 2 weeks, and his incision looks great and it's finally healed. But anyway, sitting on that chair in the hospital, I was cathing him in front of a whole room full of people, and most people don't understand what intermittent catheterization is. It's just a catheter, and you insert it through the urethra to drain the bladder. But most people don't know, that never know that some people have to do that. And what are you doing sticking a tube into your child's penis? So I realized sitting there that this is inappropriate, that he needs private restroom access. And then what am I going to do whenever he outgrows these baby changing stations? Where am I going to go? So I brought that issue to the leadership at the time at the Oklahoma Children's Hospital. And shortly after, probably within 2 months, my husband and I were asked to join the Oklahoma Children's Hospital, the Family Advisory Council. And around that same time, I was on social media, and my state representative had mentioned a bill that Kelly Albright had introduced to the Oklahoma House, that all state-owned buildings should have a baby changing station. And I was like, yeah, they should, because there's a large population of babies out here and they don't need to be on the restroom floor. But when we do this, why don't we do it right and just require that those baby changing stations be bigger and accommodate everybody? Let's implement universal design into this idea. And I had within a couple of days, we had written legislation, and then I realized that there was other states across the country that were pursuing the same thing. And in your state, California, was the first state to enact a law to require height adjustable changing tables, but it was for amusement parks only. And then Arizona enacted its legislation, and now we've got, like, I think 18 states across the nation asking for dignified restroom access for their loved ones. But anyway, so Max's law in 2020 House Bill 3952. It passed the House floor with a lot of support, and it had 19 members of our House of Representatives vote against it. 19.
Did they say why, or do they not have to give a reason?
You know, I've heard so many reasons as to why. You know, I had one legislator tell me that, you know, he represents people up in the Panhandle, and there's not big buildings and stuff up there, so he doesn't really. He represents their voice, and that this doesn't really concern them.
Mhm.
And then I've heard several times that we just don't have the money for stuff like this.
Mm.
We don't have the money to put an end to state employees directing Oklahomans to the restroom floor, or watches they know they're going to a parking lot or leaving to go home. We don't have the money for no $2,200 table in these buildings.
I've seen that number range 2,200, like from
It
maybe,
does. It fluctuates on when they're going on sale.
yeah,
You know,
and kind of how much you have to remodel and whether it's
right.
in the wall.
Yeah.
But it sounds like just even a couple $1,000s for a table is much better than nothing.
Yeah. And whenever you're talking about a new building or a renovation,
That's millions and millions of dollars, huh?
it's, you know, look at how much a baby changing table costs. It costs like $500. And so you're just adding a little bit more to it, but for it to accommodate everybody in society,
Mhm.
not just this very small window of people that weigh less than 50 pounds that need the same, you know. So that we fall into ableism
Mhm.
and apathy, like they cannot envision their loved one or themselves needing that. So I zoomed all around that Capitol. I'd taken my state representative a wheelie, these little toy Hot Wheels. I've got one right here. I'm gonna pull it down. So Mattel,
Wow,
these little wheelies. And I
sweet.
picked one up. I picked one up. I'd picked up like 4 of them. I saw them at Walmart one day, and I'd never seen them before. And I thought, well, how cool is that? I need every single one of them. Well, I had ran up to the Capitol one day to thank my state representative for taking time to talk to me about it. And anyway, we just over time, I must have gone to every single Walmart and Dollar General hunting down these little toy cars so I could make sure that every single one of our legislators that year got one. And they all received a wheelie with a copy of Max's Law and a letter from me stating why we needed updated building standards. And it fell on deaf ears. I could not believe. I wasn't expecting the resistance. I wasn't expecting the ableism I was encountering. And at the time, I didn't even realize I was encountering ableism because I really didn't even understand it myself. I've learned a lot about ableism over the years, and I've tried to educate myself on um, societal norms, you know, what we accept and what we unknowingly believe, and our just our unknown bias we have, right? So no, the bill passed the House, and then COVID hit, or the bill passed the House. I filed an ADA grievance because it had been 6 months and nobody in the building had told me, yes, we see this issue and we're going to fix it here.
So last you heard it passed in the House, and then you didn't hear anything for 6 months?
Yeah, so it passed in the House. I filed an ADA grievance that nobody responded to. I filed an ADA grievance with the ADA coordinator for the House of Representatives and the ADA coordinator for the Senate, and neither one of them responded to me. And then COVID hit our state a few days later. And so the bill was dead. I thought, well, the Capitol shut down. I kind of gave them grace for that unanswered ADA grievance because the Capitol had shut down, even though operations were still going on. People still had their jobs. They were working remotely. So then again, in 2021 rolls around and we introduce Max's Law again. And This time, it got assigned to a committee that Representative Kevin West was committee chair on, and he had voted in favor of Max's law in 2020. And then he had told my state representative that, well, we don't have the money for this. So he killed the bill. That year, you know, they got all of these wheelies again. You know, these wheelies, Mattel had mailed me 100 of them, and people from all over the world. I've got some from Canada, all over the United States. I've got diaper boxes of these things out in my garage that have been donated from just people wanting to advocate for these. So I want to send you one. I want you to email me or whatever mailing address you want me to send it to. But in 2021, they all got wheelies again in a letter, a more personal letter, like, hey. And then I started seeing all the positive response in our city buildings. You know, Science Museum had put in a table. The Science Museum of Oklahoma put them in a table. The Oklahoma Children's Hospital, the first state-owned building. When John Hayes knew that I was looking at not having restroom access for Max, he's like, I don't really understand how this has gone overlooked so long, but I don't like it, and we're gonna put an end to it. We're gonna put in a table. And I haven't had any negative response or pushback from any city-owned building or even private facilities that I've contacted. It's just at the Capitol and with our legislature. So you're like, okay, well, did you get your pride in the way over me filing an ADA grievance? If, you know, I don't understand. I've tried to educate every single one of them. The governor has never responded to my 8 requests to speak with one of his representatives. The lieutenant governor refuses to speak with me.
What does the text of Max's law say? Like what did it aim to do specifically?
It aimed to, there's like 140 buildings, give or take, that it would require the state-owned buildings only to install a height adjustable changing table upon a $10,000 renovation. So we had just went through this renovation at the Capitol.
Right.
And I thought, well, we just went through this renovation. When's a $10,000 renovation going to be triggered at the Capitol if we just renovated the whole building? So that was another reason why I filed an ADA grievance. I'm like, well, if they're not going to do it just because they know they should do it, they're going to force me to do it. I got to file this grievance now, because why wait? You know?
So that's saying if any state-owned building does a renovation and spends $10,000 or more, then they have to put in an adult size changing table.
Yeah, and it was also occupancy. So it wasn't just any Title II or III building. I've tried to get my state representative to introduce legislation that falls in line with Max's federal rights, which is any Title II or III building that is erected should be required to have an adult size changing table. Because if you have a known barrier in society, which this is what the ADA coordinator for Oklahoma City understands, he didn't want me having to go knocking on his door saying, hey, knock, knock, knock. We've got the Oklahoma City Convention Center, a $288 million building erected. You forgot to put a changing table in it. So he knew he didn't want any buildings to go up that would have a known barrier. But anyway, for whatever reason, my state representative has refused to introduce legislation that I've asked him to introduce for years. And he just thought that the bare minimum, even going down to the visitor centers, we introduced House Bill 3015. And that bill would have required just our visitor centers to have changing tables. And there was still people resistant to that. And so whenever that bill passed the House, this was in 2020, nobody got wheelies in 2020. Nobody gets wheelies anymore. Positive advocacy efforts, oh man, they are exhausted at this point. We are going on half a decade now.
Wow.
Anyway, so in 2022, House Bill 3015 passed the House of Representatives and had 9 members vote against it. One of it, which Chris Kennedy, he was in favor of House Bill 3952 in 2020. And for whatever reason, in 2022, he was against our state-owned visitor centers having them. So whether that goes back to pride or privilege or political games, who knows? But anyway. So I had to file an ADA grievance with the Oklahoma Department of Transportation after we were traveling from Seattle to back, and we stopped at the Blackwell Visitor Center, and I had to change max in our vehicle. So if we have a known barrier in society, what it does is it's forced, and caregivers don't have any rights under the ADA.
Yeah.
I have 0 rights under the ADA as a mother or caregiver. It clearly and specifically states that the individual living with disabilities must first personally be discriminated against in order to be eligible to file an ADA grievance.
It's a very reactive system. It doesn't really prevent.
Right.
And even once you file a grievance or sue under the ADA, does that really even set a precedent for the next person, or does that just kind of give you the accommodations you need?
Finding an attorney, I have interviewed so many. Everyone's like, just hire an attorney, hire an attorney. I'm like, first of all, you got to find an attorney that's competent enough to file a case, a Title II ADA case, and against the Oklahoma State Senate and the Capitol. That they didn't already have a conflict of interest, or that I didn't have a conflict of interest. It's not as easy. And then finding one that's willing to take it on contingency too. I had one that told me, I can't just take these cases like this because it tells me you weren't very confident, and I did have an attorney before I decided to run for Oklahoma City Council. And then the attorney, I had him for 1 day. And then they called me and said, well, we have a conflict of interest if you run in for city council. They represent IMSA.
IMSA?
It's the Emergency Medical Response System at Oklahoma City. But yeah, all these barriers. So what bothers me at this point in the game is that we have lawmakers and our members of Congress that would willingly and knowingly allow a 6.5-year-old child to be discriminated against. They know that's what I have to put my son through in order to make change in that building. Because if they don't want to do it on their own, if they don't want to make the changes on their own, like at the Capitol, I have to make him be discriminated against, or allow him to be discriminated against. That is an emotional, it's hard. It's hard on me. It's hard on it's been really difficult on my mental health. It's not just, and it's discriminatory against me. I'm being directed to the restroom floor. As his mother, I've been asked to bring in yoga mats and blankets. Would you ever I would never take my yoga mat into my restroom at home. A yoga mat does not belong in someone's restroom at home. I don't know anyone that would even do that at home. But why are we so comfortable in society about Geffen? If I came to your home with Max, you would offer your couch, your bed, anywhere. You would never direct me to the floor in your restroom at your home. So I'm hoping that this conversation, maybe I can share it with Congressman Frank Lucas.
Yeah.
And
something I've really noticed talking to people is that not only does it have an effect on the person who's being put on the floor, changed in the car, but just the caregiver too is like, it's bad for your back, it's bad for your body. It causes like all of this emotional and mental stress and kind of forces you to make these impossible decisions like, okay, do I put my child on the floor or do I put him in the back of the car where it's snowing or really hot, or do I make him sit like in dirty briefs, or do I take him home? And it's like there's not really any good option, and you're just kind of forced to do your best.
And I've got a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old too.
Mhm.
And they understand it, you know, they understand. Sometimes there's been times where we have to do separate things as a family. Like I'll just take one of my children to go do something and my other two will stay at home. Or I've never just excluded Max entirely of something, or uh, I try not to anyway, but there has been times that, like camping, we used to love going camping with this, but it is so hard to go camping with someone in a wheelchair because it's off-road everywhere. It's you're dealing with rocks and mud and and then a tent, it's really hard to get someone in and out of a wheelchair and in a tent. And there's so much of our life that has been barriers put up just for lack of access. And I don't know if you heard, but Max received an amazing gift from a nonprofit organization for an all-terrain wheelchair.
Wow.
And we get to pick it up Wednesday. And I want so bad just to drive as soon as we get it, just straight down to Galveston and go hit the beach, because there's been so many places that we just can't go because of lack of access. And in a modern world in America, we're putting people on the moon, but we can't put disabled people on the beaches. We can't provide restroom access in our brand new multi-million dollar buildings. And to see the barriers that are in the way of that change are men and women in elected positions. They don't understand this life. They don't understand how barriers at every turn prevent many families from having a good and happy life. So anyway, we're going into year 5 of Max's Law. It's gotten tied up with a lot of political games and pride, unfortunately, and I'm very disappointed in a lot of Oklahomans about it. So anyway, but I have hope. I have hope that maybe through our conversation, maybe I can get the attention of members of Congress and maybe even our own lawmakers who have made really poor decisions.
I
So
think I asked you this question, but can you tell me what it's like to use an adult changing table? And if you remember any specific times that you've used one in public, just what was that like?
yeah, I remember I've used several. The Science Museum has them. The Oklahoma Children's Hospital, I've used it several times, but not too long ago, I was at the Bethany Children's Health Center, and Nico Gomez, it didn't take him very long to know of the need and make change in his building. But we were there, and it wasn't the first time I'd used the table either, but we were there one night for adaptive basketball. Max was able to participate in a wheelchair basketball program that taught him basic skills on how to maneuver an adaptive chair. And he had a bowel movement, an unexpected bowel movement. And I just, without thinking, I just, went to the bathroom and changed him. And it wasn't until halfway through his diaper change that I realized that I didn't have to think about anything. I just took him to the restroom. And I hope to have that feeling more as normalizing needs in society. I shouldn't have to think so much about his restroom access. And there's just a handful of places in Oklahoma City that we can go to, and I don't have to worry with if I'm going to be discriminated against, or if I'm going to have to worry about, where am I going to change him? Is there guest services here? Or might kind of go out to the car, just go to adaptive basketball, and just like any other mother, just go to the restroom with your kid and get them cleaned up, and so we can go on about our business. And that first feeling of normalcy hit me at the Bethany Children's Rehabilitation Hospital not too long ago. And for a mother to feel that is, I hope that so many other people can have that experience of just having a normal restroom experience with your child needing caregiver assistance. This work has been so extremely hard. I was thinking today about our conversation and what I wanted, some highlights or whatever I wanted to cover. But to speak with somebody and know that I've changed the way that they view others and a barrier in society, and then watch it transform. So recently I went with my friend Brenda out to the Cleveland County Disability. They had a little gathering of an advocacy day. And I was speaking with a guy that works for the city of Norman. And before he had met me, he never knew that there was this barrier to restroom access. And I must have sat and talked with him for a good 15 minutes, but to see how positive and excited he was about the change coming to the city of Norman. There's been an ordinance introduced there, and it'll go before the city council soon. And a lot of buildings in Norman are putting in tables, and just to hear his excitement over the change that he's now taking ownership of and taking pride in. I watched that unfold in front of me just a few days ago, and that, yes, me and so many others across the nation are advocating for these, but also to see how those advocacy efforts are being spread elsewhere, and it's the conversation is carried on. So that is something I recently noticed too, that but it gives me hope, it gives me encouragement, and I have hope one day Max's law is going to pass the Oklahoma legislature with unanimous support, because I believe all Oklahomans need to get on board for updated building standards. And I just would have never thought that it would take this long to convince anybody that we needed it. So it's been hard. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to share? I feel like you have so many thoughtful things that you're sharing. I just want to make sure that you're able to share.
What have you learned since diving into I know you said that you've heard a lot of the same issues addressed. But is there anything that you can take away from what I know you've just now started diving in to having these conversations, but what have you taken away? What's been the most important thing for you?
I think hearing that that people with all different needs can benefit from having adult changing tables in restrooms. In my head going in, I thought it was just people who were fully dependent and needed changing, but a lot of people can, if they have a changing table, like can change themselves or can maintain some sort of independence. And by being laid on the floor, I think that just all gets taken away. I think maybe you were the one that told me about someone who needed like a surface to put a tampon in, and
Yep.
just like all different needs. It's not really one singular population is going to use it. There's just so many ways that it helps people maintain their independence. And then I think also a lot of people that I have talked to are really involved in advocacy and are making the change. And there's just this really big kind of like sense of community. A lot of people mention like, well, we don't need a hoist, but I know someone who does, and kind of looking out for each other and each other's needs. And it's really nice to see just
Yeah.
when I ask people kind of what would be accessible to you, they don't only say what would be accessible to them or their families. They mention things that their friends might need or people that they've interacted with. And there's just that sense kind of support and community that's been also a big theme.
Yeah. Whenever I was speaking with the students at OU, the School of Architecture, one of the professors there had asked me, well, what else? What else needs to be in a restroom that you know of? And I said, well, I know a man that has a CP, is born CP, and he requires that handlebars be on both sides of a toilet. So he has independent transfer. And then he would also require a bidet. So he has independent cleaning. So if he were to go into a public restroom with his motorized chair, and as long as that toilet had a bar on either side and a bidet, he could go places on his own.
Mhm.
But without those supports in place, he is required to have a caregiver. And
Yeah,
so
so it just
the cost of putting in a bar on both sides of a toilet and a bidet, and if you can make a family restroom that is truly, it's truly thinking of all. And then I gifted a wheelie to all professors at the School of Architecture at the University of Oklahoma. And one of them reached out to me and said, I'm a diabetic, and there's times where I need to take care of my diabetes medication, and I prefer a counter. I need a counter in a restroom, and I also need paper towels
Mhm.
and installation of hot air dryers, and not providing just a very small counter space. Um, it's something is so thoughtful of making sure there's a small counter space for people in a restroom, and weighing the pros and cons of hand dryers versus hand towels, and just looking at all of that. And if we can really incorporate all those needs into um, our building plans with reason, like there's a reason why you have to have a counter in a restroom, even if it's a small counter. And if you're talking about a family restroom, right? So large buildings like what Oklahoma City is about to adopt, if a large building is required to have a family restroom, which the square footage and uh, visitors to a building. So if a building is required to have a family restroom if it has 6 stalls or more. It automatically triggers a family restroom. And then what is a family restroom? What makes a family restroom? So going before the Oklahoma City Building Code Commission to amend what Oklahoma City defines as a restroom to include at least one adult-sized changing table in every building. Why would anyone be against that? I mean, you're talking, it'll hold a baby or an adult. And then how much further can we take that? So in a family restroom in the city of Oklahoma City, should a family restroom's toilet have bars on both sides? And do we need to maybe look at a bidet? America, the United States, compared to other countries in the world, a lot of countries have that. It's customary. So why is the United States so against something like that? So just looking at all needs in a restroom, yes, and it benefits people that aren't caregiver dependent, like you mentioned. In fact, she lives out in California, but yeah, she needs something to help her with her arm support in order to maneuver her hand to insert and remove personal hygiene products. And without that, she's not able to um, use a tampon when she would prefer a tampon over a pad. So those are important for people, and with basic planning in multi-million-dollar buildings.
Yeah, and just,
So
making sure you hear from the community and that you get community input before big renovations and before even passing laws and policies. It's just, people that have been historically silenced and haven't been able to provide input. I think things are always better when you keep the needs, the community in mind and center people's voices. So I
Yeah.
applaud you and all your work, and I know it's taking a toll just mentally. It's a lot of time and effort, and it you just want to do the best, for Max, and I see that, and I'm grateful for all that you've done and for talking to me. And I've seen some things that you've written, and that's part of, how I was able to do the background research for my project. So please let me know how I can support you, and I look forward to working together in the future. I feel like we will definitely,
We definitely need to stay in contact.
you know,
There's a lot of good coming.
yeah.
My docket number with the United States Department of Interior, whenever that when that comes through, that's a national level issue. That's crossing state lines. That is forcing a federal property to abide by the ADA, anyway, there's a lot of good coming. I'm so thankful that you were willing to talk to me again. And I want to stay in contact with you, and I want you to email me your address so I can send you a wheelie. I want you to know that it probably came from a wheelie hunter, and it could have came from anywhere, from all over,
Wow,
just so I could give it to you.
I love that. Okay, I'm just gonna stop the recording.
Okay.